In .NET 8, Blazor has become a full-featured web framework that is modular and adaptable to your needs over time. In this video, we're going to be looking at how Blazor works now and how to utilize server-side rendering mode, stream rendering, Blazor Server components, Blazor WebAssembly components, and components that transition automatically from server to WebAssembly using auto mode. That's a lot. Now, before we dive in, I want to share a couple of things with you. First, if you're interested in improving your C# skills, be sure to subscribe to this channel. There's lots more .NET 8 videos to come, as well as a whole library full of other C# topics as well. Second, if you're looking for more free C# resources, go to iamtimcorey.com and go to the resources tab. You'll find my podcast, which is advice for developers in the industry or getting into the industry on how to become better, as well as a C# project page and much more. And finally, if you're looking to dive deeper into a specific C# topic, I have a variety of courses that can help. For instance, I just launched today the Blazor in .NET 8 course. So Blazor from start to finish course. That covers all of .NET 8. It covers all this new stuff. We go in real depth into how to work with us in the real world. So not only you'll receive a world-class education, whatever topic you buy a course in, but you'll also help fund my free content so that everyone can have a great education in C#, not just those who can afford it. So let's dive right into Blazor in .NET 8. So I am going to create a new project. No, I am using the preview version of Visual Studio just because I'm recording this right before the launch. So the launch hasn't happened yet. It will happen by the time this video goes out. And you can just use the regular version of Visual Studio as long as you've updated, and make sure you have .NET 8, which will come with that update. So we're going to choose the Blazor Web App project. This is the new single project for everything. It has SSR, it has stream rendering, it has server, it has WebAssembly, it has auto. So it's all in here. Let's choose Blazor Web App. Or call this Intro to Blazor. And the source code is available. If you go down to the description, there's a link. You can download the source code. What's going to do is going to ask you for an email address. It will email you a copy of the source code. So Intro to Blazor app, hit next. And the framework is .NET 8. Now, yours won't say preview. Mine says preview because it's not yet out. But we're going to choose no authentication type for now. We're going to leave that for a separate video. Yes to HTTPS. The interactivity mode. This is where you say, hey, this is the kind of stuff I want. Now, if you say just server, what that's going to do is it's going to have just Blazor Server components, which means you won't be equipped for WebAssembly or auto. If we choose WebAssembly, we will be equipped for just WebAssembly, and auto you have both. I would encourage you that if you're looking for any interactivity at all, just put auto. Now, there is a bit of a downside in doing that, in that it's going to create two projects instead of one. If you want just one project really simple and you don't ever want WebAssembly, then you can just choose server. That gives you just one project. But the two projects aren't that difficult to navigate, and this is where you can have that flexibility to expand your app over time to include other render mode types. So we're going to choose that. This does not mean that your application will always be server or WebAssembly. You don't have to have either of those things in order to get your web application off the ground. This just prepares you and puts the scaffolding in place for server and WebAssembly. So just want to make sure we're clear on that. Interactivity location. You have per page or component or global. This is where you get to choose, do I want to set a global setting for server or WebAssembly or auto? And my suggestion is to say no. You want it per page or component. You want every page to specify how it's going to render. And the benefit there is that by default, if you don't specify something, it will get rendered with server-side rendering, meaning you will have all the speed in the world. It'll be very, very fast. It'll be very, very efficient. And you won't have any of the overhead of an open connection with server or with the downloading of the source code like WebAssembly. So that way you get to choose, I want to add some overhead in order to have more interactivity. So that's the way I prefer to do it. We're going to include the sample pages, and that's because this will give us the best view of how this works. We're not going to go deep into code today necessarily. So this gives us a starting point rather than trying to write the code ourselves. And then this checkbox, I want to leave unchecked. So this checkbox is a little confusing. It says do not use top level statements, and that's unchecked. So we're going to use top level statements, which they have been a thing since .NET 6. I would encourage you to leave this box unchecked so that you use the current and modern way of doing things. But if you really, really, really want top level statements to go away, then check the box. Hit create. And like I said, this was going to create for us 2 different projects. So we can close out of the initial pages. And here we have Intro to Blazor and Intro to Blazor.client. So what's the difference here? Well, Intro to Blazor, this is where all of our server-side code lives, and all of our server-side or Blazor Server components will live. So if we look at our components, we'll see here that under pages, we have the home page and we have the weather page. So notice the weather page has code in here. We're going to run code against this, but it is not running with Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly. Since that is true, we can put this on the server side. That way, this code down here will never go to the client. The client will never see the C# code. And that's not true for Blazor WebAssembly projects. WebAssembly projects send the C# code, granted in a DLL, but they send that C# code down to the client, and the client could read that code directly. So that's true of all client-side, fully client-side project types. Angular, React, they use fully client-side code, which means you can read the raw JavaScript. Yes, you can try obfuscation, you can try minification, but the reality is you can reverse those very, very easily. So you're always going to put your actual source code on the client if the client is running fully client-side. So just note that. But in this case, we're in the server project, and the server project content does not go to the client. So the home page, notice no specification for what type it is. So this is going to be a server-side rendered page. So everything here is server-side rendered or is Blazor Server if it specifies it's Blazor Server. Now, in the client, we have pages, and there we have the counter. We're familiar with the counter. If you're familiar with the components from a normal Blazor project, Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly, they both came with a counter component as a demo. We still have that, but it's in the client project. And the reason it's in the client project is because it requires some client-side interactivity. And it's not just Blazor Server, it's Blazor, in this case, Auto. So we have this attribute up here that says Render Mode Interactive Auto. This is telling the Blazor system that this component will render with Blazor Server to start, and then in the background, it will download the source code, and then the next run, it will run Blazor WebAssembly. So this way, we can have our component that changes over time, but because it does change over time to WebAssembly, we can't have that in the main project because of the fact that it will download the source code to the client. And so that goes in the client project. Okay, so let's just run this real quick because I want to show you, first of all, it seems very, very similar to what you already have seen with Blazor Server for or Blazor WebAssembly for the demos, but at the same time, it is different. So let's see how it's different once it launches. Okay, let's load the page up here, and this looks a lot like a typical Blazor project. We have hello world, we have our counter, which we can start clicking on, and when we do, it starts increasing the value. And then we have the weather app, which if you notice, let's go back to it. Notice it says loading. Watch real quick. It says loading, and then it loads the page. But wait a minute. If we go back to the weather page, let's move this off for a minute. Go to weather. There is no attribute at the top here. It says attribute stream rendering is true, but that's it. there is no attribute like the counter has for render mode. It's not render mode interactive, it's auto, it's not render mode interactive server or interactive WebAssembly. So what's this stream rendering? Well, this page gets loaded and built on the server. So this is all server-side rendered, as is the home page. The home page is server-side rendered. But yet the weather page changes over time. So we get the loading first, and then it has the weather in there. How'd that happen? Well, what happened was when the page was built on the server and compiled, we come down here and we have an await. Now, this is an await task.delay just to put a delay in here so you can see that loading page. It's just a simulation or a demo. So, and actually we can probably increase that over to make it like 2 seconds, something like that, make it easier to see. But what happens is because there's an await, the page gets rendered as if it's null to begin with. So we have the loading dialog. And then because we're doing stream rendering, it will get the new values when they're done, and it will inject them just in the spot, in that component's space, which means that it will not disrupt the rest of the page. It's not a full page reload. It's just reloading that component when there are new values to put in there. It's a lot like a client-side application, but there's not quite the same interactivity. So this allows for a much more flexible application that feels like a client-side application, but it's fully server-side. And it's doing very, very little work on the client, and it's not opening a full connection back to the client. Now, I want to demonstrate this just to kind of show off how this works and what's going on. So to start off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to our layout and go to the nav menu. So this is the navigation. And inside the navigation, I am going to make a mess. I'm going to say div with a style equals background color of white. All right. And then in this div, I'm going to put the counter, which notice I have intro to blazor.client.pages.counter. So I can shorten this if I put this using directive in my imports. So using, and there's the link to the pages. I can get rid of then this. Okay, so with that, now notice that my server is referring to a component in the client. That's okay. But the reason I'm putting this counter here is because I want to show off the state. So let's hit no here and find out using, it's not, oh, we don't have, it's not using, it's using. If you don't spell things right, things don't work quite right. Let's run this again and see if we can get it to run. There we go. So now I got this really ugly counter in the middle. I put the background of white so you can see it. Otherwise, it takes the background of this purple and you can't see the words. So if I click the counter and I have a value of 10, right? And then I come over here to the weather page, notice the value of 10 did not change, even though I loaded a different page. So I go to a different page, and first of all, this counter is different than that counter, so you can click this value and put it to 6. But notice that this did not get reloaded. This is because of what's called enhanced navigation. So enhanced navigation says that when I navigate to a new place, and notice that this nav bar is always going to be here. It's just this inner component that changes. When I go there, that it's going to just inject the component into this section, not refresh the entire page. This is something that server-side systems like PHP or MVC or Razor pages, they don't do. They reload the entire page every time you go somewhere new or update data. Well, with the stream rendering and enhanced navigation, that's not the case. We can render just the component that changes so that it's not a full page refresh when we go somewhere new. So that's one benefit. But then this also helps with the stream rendering, helps with this weather component, because notice that it says loading and then it changes just this component, not the counter value, which is currently at 10. Let's turn this all off. So the easiest way to turn it off, let's close out of navigation and close out of counter, and I'm going to turn off the stream rendering. So this will no longer render the weather page as stream rendering. So by just turning this off, you're going to see what's going to happen when we try to load the page. So first of all, we're going to increase our counter. Now it says 8. We're going to go to the counter page. That still works. We go to the weather page. And do you notice the delay? And there's no loading here. Let's make it a lot more clear. So I'm going to change this from 500 to 2000. That's 2 full seconds. So we're putting an intentional delay in getting our data back for 2 seconds, just to show off that, in fact, there is this delay. So we're going to change the counter page. Now it says 9. We'll go to weather, 1, 2, loads. Okay, so I didn't click again. It just went there after 2 seconds. That's a little bit frustrating, right? That's what happens when we don't have stream rendering turned on and we're asking for asynchronous data from, say, an API that might take a while to respond, is we have that delay, and it's not something that users want to see. They want to see the immediate page load and know that something happened. Otherwise, they click that weather link over and over and over again and say, hey, your stuff is broken. So this is why stream rendering is so valuable, is because it can render the page initially with some placeholder data where the asynchronous call will finally populate. And we can get that page rendered very quickly, and the user can see that something is happening. But let's go even further. Notice that the counter hasn't changed. It still says 9. That's because of enhanced navigation. So let's turn that off, which we're going to go all the way over here to app.razor. This is your actual document. So this is where the actual HTML document lives. We cover a lot more in the course about, hey, you know what? This is a very small library, Bootstrap is, but we make it even smaller in the course by updating it, which it's down to, I believe, 37 kilobytes, which is tinier than every one of your images or any one of your images. And yet it's very, very powerful, and I'd highly recommend that you still use it. But we cover, what app.css is and how this is a per component style to override app.css. But down in here under the routes, this is where our actual page gets rendered. We have this right here, script. And this is blazor.web.js. This is the script that handles all the Blazor stuff when it comes to the stream rendering, enhanced navigation, and more. If we comment this out, and we're going to run this application again. So I've taken out the blazor.web.js file and launched the application. And notice it still looks like it works. And in fact, if I click the click me on the counter, nothing seems to work. Okay, there's no interaction here. And on the weather component, okay, you can load it, but it's taking a long time. So we can render our site without that JavaScript, without any client-side interactivity, and our components still load. They're just slow if they're waiting for asynchronous calls, but it's just a fully server-side project. Now, I would recommend not doing that, because this interactivity is, as you can see, it really changes how your application works, even if you are just fully server-side rendered. So if we forget for a minute that we want to do Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, and just say, hey, we want to do server-side rendering, we can take out JavaScript. Well, you could, but then when you go to a weather page, well, it's a full page refresh, and your updates have to wait until that asynchronous call is done before they load the data. So I would recommend against doing that. Keep that JavaScript in there, and then you get the enhanced navigation out of the box. And whenever you want it, you can also have stream rendering, so that now your components update cleanly, the whole page doesn't have to refresh, and you can see the loading screen. Let's just update our counter to 5 and go to weather. Notice the loading, and then it loads. So we can go right to the loading page. We can come back, go right to the loading page, go right back. We can go to the loading page, and it loads the data when it's done, and it doesn't refresh the rest of our page. So this is where these new tools, the stream rendering and enhanced navigation, are really, really powerful. And you can do some enhanced navigation or enhancements on your forms as well for form posting. So really cool stuff there. When it comes to creating new components, you get to choose, but if you're going to have a component that might be WebAssembly or Auto, I would encourage you to create the component in your client project. So you can just, Control-Shift-A and call it something.razor. So demo.razor. And there's your new component. And then you can utilize this component. Let's just put a paragraph. Hello, everybody. Okay. And then you can just, pop that component wherever you want. So let's go to the home page, and we're come down here and say demo. And now you can have that demo component on our page. And right now it's server side rendered. So it's not even being rendered with anything special. There's no stream rendering even. It's just putting the data there. And that works. And then, down the road, you can say, you know what? I kind of want to have some interactivity. So I'm going to put an attribute on here. And I'm going to say the render mode is, and I recommend saying auto all the time because this is the best of both worlds. Now, there's always going to be the it depends, okay? Whenever you see someone that says, okay, it's always this, that's a problem. My recommendation is you start from here. So start auto, think about, you don't have to build your component yet, but think about it as, by default, we're going to do auto, but is there a reason to only do server or only do WebAssembly? And there can be. There are certain components that maybe you want to have directly access the database that you say, you know what, they should be only server and they should live on the server side. But if the default probably should be auto because that's the one that's most likely going to give you the best benefits. And that's only for if you want interactivity. So if we want to make this into our own counter, we can say int current count equals 0. That's a private int. We can mark it as private. And in Blazor, if you're not familiar, your code behind, this code right here, which is technically a code behind, even though it's on the same page, it's still a code behind in the actual behind the scenes. The code behind, everything is private and yet can be accessed on the page. So that's the default you want to do. Only make it public if you're going to be making a parameter in or out. Okay, so we're going to say paragraph, the current count is at current count, like so. And then we'll create a button down here. Button, we'll put a class on it, btn-outline-primary. This is Bootstrap, by the way. And we'll close it off for now and say increase count, like so. And then we'll create a private void increase count method. And we're going to say current count plus equal, let's start with 1, like so. And then we will call this. So at on click equals, and this is a delegate. This is going to, that's why you don't put the open and close parentheses. It's not calling this as a method. It's calling it or it's putting it in as a delegate that will then get called. Okay, so it's a little bit different, but the on click, we're going to increase the count, and we're render mode auto. That's really all we need to do, unless I forgot something, but I don't think I did. It's probably just going to look poor because of the fact that I didn't really do much styling. But So we now have our hello everybody, our current count is 0. Let's zoom in here a bit more. And we're gonna say increase count, and there we go. There our counter goes up every time I click it. And we have our own little counter component. We've added that auto render mode so that this can now be changed. For right now, it's going to be server, and it's going to download in the background. It's probably already downloaded. And now it's going to be WebAssembly the next time it runs. So really cool stuff there. Let's go through now. I want to talk through the various parts because we cover this in the course, but again, I try to cover a lot of stuff for free because I'm not about just the, here's a teaser, now buy the full stuff. Let's talk about the full stuff because I think it's important that you understand this when you're working with Blazor. So the start of any application is program.cs. This is where the start happens. And we have a typical program.cs with our services first. And then we have our use static files, use anti-forgery. This is something newer that what it does is when you create a form, it's going to create a hidden field on that form that has the a key in there. It's a very long string, and it's hidden, and it'll get posted back with the form. And this just proves that the user went through the form on your page and didn't just try to hit the API directly. So anti-forgery is a great thing. It's built right into edit forms. So if you're using the Blazor edit form, it's built right in. You don't have to do anything. If you use a form and turn it into a Blazor form, then you have to add the anti-forgery token, which is very easy to do. Okay, now app.map razor components, it starts at app. So under components, you'll see the app.razor. This again is your entire page. This is your actual HTML document and the only one you'll see here. The rest is going to be partial things that you put typically in this spot right here. Now, once you've got the components, since we said auto, it's going to add interactive server render mode, which is Blazor Server. It's going to add interactive WebAssembly render mode, which is WebAssembly. And then it's going to add additional assemblies, which is our client project. Now, it says type of counter.assembly. What that's doing is it's saying, hey, I just need to know some file, some thing in that namespace. So it knows that counter is there, so it's going to call that, but it's actually getting the assembly of counter, which means the entire project. So everything in there, including demo, will get pulled in. You could also say type of and reference the imports.razor file instead, and that would work. Okay, so that brings in the entire assembly, so everything gets mapped properly for our routing. Okay, so that's all there is to starting up your project. Then we go to app.razor. That's where all of our actual HTML document is, which means if you wanted to add some more meta information, which you probably should, you would go there, probably. There is this head outlet here, which allows us to put more head content on a per component basis. That allows us to do things like change the title or to change other meta information like the description on a per page basis, which is very, very good for search engine optimization, for when you have a page you want to be shareable that's going to show up nice on, say, Facebook or Twitter or in Google search results or whatever else, to show up nicely with a nice image and a nice description and a nice title. That's where you would set that all up, is on the per page component, most likely. So we have our routes. We look at routes.razor. We'll see that we have our routing and how to the found context and the routing. The one thing that's important to note with this new Blazor web type is we have this thing called found. This is a little bit legacy in the fact that this is we only use found now in the new Blazor web app. There is a tag called not found. And we used to use this in the previous Blazors to put our 404 pages to say, hey, page not found. We can still do that in the standalone Blazor WebAssembly project, but we don't do it here. And in fact, this is not used at all in our new Blazor web app. You would create an actual 404 page, not create a razor component like that and you don't put there for not found. Okay, so just kind of a quick note there. Now, when it comes to our layout, we have our main layout, and this is the typical structure. This is pretty much the same as it has always been, as is the navigation menu. It's pretty similar. This is where the navigation menu gets set up for putting navigations on pages, which if you notice in the main layout, we have nav menu. So that's the component, which is the navigation menu. And if you want to get rid of the navigation, you would just delete this section, and there you go. There's the rest. Your body goes right here. So again, there's an about bar at the top. You can get rid of that by deleting these 3 lines from lines 9 to 11, because that's just part of the main layout that you can change. You have full control over how this works. Now, we have pages here. We have error, home, and weather. You won't have all of these if you're using the template without the sample data. But note that everything in Blazor is a component. So even though we have an app page here, we could still use the home component somewhere else, kind of like this, like our demo is being used. And conversely, our components can be pages, but they don't have to be. This demo component right here, there is no page directive at the top. So you can't access it by doing our URL /demo. In order to do that, you'd have to add that page directive at the top. Page, and then say /demo or /demo /my demo, and that'd be the full path. Whatever you choose here, you can have more than one of these, and you can even pass in data or or have default data on those routes as well. So lots of cool stuff you can do there with your routing. And then we have our app settings.json in the main project. This is where you would put things like connection strings or other secret information. And yes, we still have the concept of user secrets. So you right click on your project and say manage user secrets. This JSON file, which is not part of your project, it's only for your local machine, but it will override what's in app settings.json. That is the place to put anything for local testing or local development. So I encourage you to use that. And just note that's in the server project. It is not accessible from the client project. And this is where things can get a little tricky. Let's figure this out. Okay, so I'm going to inject the I configuration. I'll call it config. Now, in app settings.json, let's put a new node where I say demo info. And we're going to say, this is our demo info from app settings.json. Okay, so in our code now, we're going to have a private string, demo info, we'll call it the same thing. We'll start off with an empty string. And we're going to have a new paragraph that's going to say at demo info. And I'm going to create a protected override on initialized. I'll use the on initialized since there's no async call being made. And this will get loaded once the page gets loaded. So I'm going to say that demo info equals config.getValue. And I believe by default it's string, but let's just do it anyways. And we're going to say demo info. I believe that's the case I'm going to use. Let's just look. I like to be consistent. It is. Okay, so that's going to put the string from the app settings.json file into this string, which gets displayed on the page. This is on the home page. Let's launch this. So when this launches, what do you think is going to happen? Okay, well, it says this is our demo info. Wait, what happened? We had more information on this page. Let's launch it again and see this. Now, we're in development mode, which it turns off a lot of things. But if you watch, this is our demo info from appsettings.json, and it goes away. So what happened? Well, the component initially rendered as Blazor Server. And like I said, because we're in development mode with Visual Studio, that kind of changes and tweaks how a lot of these settings work. So it's not going to save our WebAssembly information, not going to cache that between calls. Otherwise, what would happen is it'd be very hard to debug because we'd be using the previous version of the component every time we made a change. And so it's going to always refresh that cache and start us over at Blazor Server and then launch Blazor WebAssembly after it's downloaded. So the page initially, the component initially for demo launched with the Blazor Server version, and Blazor Server has access to the configuration. However, Blazor WebAssembly does not. So when it switched over from one to the other, it reloaded the page and wiped out this value. Now, it handled it gracefully because there's technically iConfiguration on the client side as well. It's just that we don't have anything in that configuration because we're not storing anything sensitive there. Therefore, we didn't put any appsetting.json file in the project. But because of that transition, it ends up with an empty value and it overwrites what was in there because we switched over to the Blazor WebAssembly mode. So you see something quirky like that, it's probably because you're rendering it in a way that the WebAssembly does not have access to something that the server does. Let's change this interactive mode over to server. And now let's run this component again. And when we do, we'll see that it maintains this, our demo info is from appsettings.json. This is still here. And we can play around with changing the count. It's still here. It's not going away. If we change this again from server to WebAssembly and launch it, we'll see that we never have access to this data. So we don't see the value. Well, actually, we do see it temporarily. In fact, if we refresh this again, it shows up and it goes away. Well, why is that? Because the first time it renders is actually rendering on the server, even though it is WebAssembly. So there's a little bit of a difference there. It's a little frustrating there. But at the same time, what it's showing us is we don't have access to it all the time. And in fact, if there is something that, let's change it back to auto. If there is something that we can only access on the server that doesn't have a equivalent on the client, then it will crash. So we need to know that because iConfiguration has an equivalent on the client, but not everything does. For example, if we talk directly to SQL Server, well, that'll work on the server, but not on WebAssembly, and it will crash. That, I think, is probably one of the biggest gotchas when working with these systems is when you use auto, you have to remember that it's going to be WebAssembly. Therefore, it cannot have direct access to a database. It cannot have direct access to your secrets. It cannot have direct access to your app settings. Okay, so now you've seen that. Let's close all these tabs and go look at the client project. We have the server project, and that's pretty simple. Then we have the client project, and in here we have our pages, which we've seen. And by the way, the naming is not great inside for our folders. We have components up here with layouts and pages, and then we have just pages down here, but they're not all pages. They're sometimes components. So you might want to change the naming a little bit. It's not going to hurt anything. You don't have to have a specific, call it. You don't have to call it pages, have anything inside there. You can call it whatever you want, and then it'll be picked up just fine. But just know that the name is not great. But we still have our imports.razor. Notice this is a different imports.razor than what we have up here in our server project. So this is different. So you can have both. This one down here in the client project applies to the client project. So if you have a using directive in the client project, it won't be applied in the server project. Okay, we also have a program.cs, which is very simple, but we do have one. Why is that? Well, because there are times when this will be launched independently. In fact, if you run a component as WebAssembly, this is what will be used. So this is what's going to be used for running our fully client-side C# stuff. So just note that that will be important to understand. You might have to tweak this file as opposed to the other program.cs file if there are certain things you'll need for WebAssembly. Okay, finally, there is a www root in both of these projects. So in this www root, we do have an app settings.json, which this is for the client side, and it just has logging information. Again, you should not put anything sensitive here. The client will be able to read all of this text. So do not put connection strings, do not put secrets, because WebAssembly should not have direct access to a database anyway. You need to talk through an API, which this server project is kind of an API. Okay, so in our server project, we have a www root, and this is where we have the Bootstrap. By the way, the template brings down a version of Bootstrap and does it locally. That's version 5.1.0. In the course, I showed how to upgrade, but basically, you just go to your app.razor and replace this line right here with a call to a CDN with the Bootstrap file. It will change the size from, I think, 160 kilobytes down to like 37 kilobytes to go with a CDN, and it will make your version be the latest version, which time of this recording is 5.3 point something. So improvements all around, and yeah, it's not for the most part a breaking change. And then also note that we have our app.css. This is our site-wide CSS document. You can make changes here or just wipe out Microsoft defaults. We do have a favicon for the application, which right now is a default Blazor favicon. You could change that if you wanted to. And for a production app, you definitely should. But anything else that's like a standard file that's a static file, like images or JavaScript files or anything else like that, you can put in this www root folder. Now, speaking of JavaScript, I do want to point out some people don't realize Blazor has full access to JavaScript, and JavaScript can have full access to Blazor, meaning you can set up a component in Blazor that can talk to JavaScript, and you can call JavaScript and get data back out and put it into Blazor. So you can have that two-way interaction, which means that you can use pretty much any JavaScript library or component out there with Blazor. So you're not saying, I'm only going to use Blazor and I'm cutting off all JavaScript. No, you're saying, I'm going to use Blazor, and if I want, I can use whatever JavaScript I want. So you're leaving that door open for whatever you want to do, whatever works best for your application. So I always encourage you that if it's a interactivity with a screen where you're changing, manipulating things, maybe start with Blazor, because you already have something built in. A lot of times people overlook the current, built-in power because they find something flashy that does the same thing, but adds more dependencies to your application that you really don't need. So I encourage you to figure out if you actually need those dependencies before you just go adding them like crazy. On the other hand, I would encourage you not to say, I'm never using JavaScript, because there might be a better option out there for certain circumstances than trying to reinvent the wheel. So it does interact really well with JavaScript. We covered that in the course. I'll probably cover it in a future video as well. But this is Blazor. This is Blazor with auto. It has server-side rendering. We've seen stream rendering. We have Blazor Server. We have Blazor WebAssembly, and we have auto that transitions between server and WebAssembly. So lots of cool stuff. This thing is very powerful, very fast, and you can take your existing knowledge of C# and build out a user interface that is fast, that's either server or client side, or that transitions from one to the other. And you can do so in one project, or in this case, 2 projects, very, very easily. So really great project. I think this is probably the way I'll move forward with almost every web project I do in C# because it just covers that much ground. It's got enough in there that I don't think I see a reason to go with an MVC project or Razor Pages anymore. There's still definitely a reason for API, but I think that Blazor has come out with an all-in-one system that allows for such flexibility that I don't see a reason not to default to it. Okay, so that's my thoughts on Blazor. It's a great project type. I would encourage you to check it out, learn more, go deeper, really understand how Blazor works. If you have questions, leave them down in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are on this new version of Blazor. And if you've tried it out, let me know, if you come across any stumbling blocks or things you want explained more. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.